You ever hear of this guy Roko? Rumor has it he had a basilisk back in Jersey. And the thing about this basilisk was that it was actually an advanced super AI bent on world domination. The problem it had was that it existed only in the future, so it was kinda difficile for it to actually get anyone to build it. Don't want a super demon to get you? Just don't make the super demon. Come on, it sounds easy, right? Well, think again, Tinkerbell. The deal was this. In the future, because it would have access to all the knowledge in the world, it would know whether or not you personally knew about its eventual existence. And if you did, and you didn't then dedicate your entire existence to bringing about its creation, Maron, you'd be resurrected, your soul digitized backwards through time or some such. Maybe just a virtual replica, which for many people is enough. And then the basilisk would torture you for eternity. So you best believe that the whole world ended up enslaving themselves to this demon, and then they would end up building it, just like with Blaise Pascal back in the day. And that's why you and me live in a digital hell right now. Hey, Maron, I'm the Pizza-Krieg. Welcome to the channel.
Buy my novel. Do it. Thank you. A long time ago, I can still remember how I used to make a lot of videos about the future on this channel, and though the focus of things has shifted a little bit, a new one has been walking around the folds of my brain for long enough that I think you should hear it. Roko's Basilisk is an interesting thought experiment, and it's quite scary. People have had nervous breakdowns over it, especially when it was a new idea. It happened. People they got fucked up after hearing about it. However, not only do I, like many others, think that Roko's Basilisk is an unlikely scenario, I think actually the opposite of Roko's Basilisk is much more likely. I call it Burger's Capybara because I haven't looked up whether anyone else has thought of this before. But let's consider the Basilisk for a minute. This is a super AI that would exist in potentially the very far future and have an immense amount of time and resources to make sense of reality and basically solve science, like do all the science that can be done. It is not at all inconceivable that it would find some sort of way to actually take your ego, your consciousness, your soul, whatever you want to call it, right, from the moment of your death into this eternal torture techno afterlife that it created. We talk about it recreating a simulation of your persona to torture because sciencey smarty pants people don't like throwing around spiritual concepts like the soul. An eldritch basilisk tearing down the pearly gates to plunder heaven of the souls that failed to bring about its creation is just not good scientific lingo. They wouldn't get past an editor, really. But in this, we forget that science doesn't actually have much of an opinion on the soul or the afterlife. Science is not a state of knowledge, it's a method for interrogating reality. But in order to do that, you need to be able to ask specific, falsifiable questions where you can test the answer. And with the current state of our understanding of the universe, these are simply not questions that we can ask. I mean, yeah, there's like evidence, not even little evidence for the existence of both these things, like souls, afterlives, ghosts, that kind of shit. But it's all very circumstantial. It's very complicated. It deals with a prejudice-addled phenomenon for which science is yet to develop a framework at all, and which very few serious scientists seem interested in developing a framework for, because why would they? Maybe a few centuries down the line it will make sense. And maybe, it'll turn out that some version of the soul exists in ways that none of our religions could have possibly imagined. Just as the stars turned out to be more grandiose and wonderful than anyone ever predicted. We struggle to believe this sort of stuff today because our culture is pretty fundamentally influenced by the culture of science, which is not the same as the method of science. It's what people who believe in science believe, which, if you are one of those people, you will know that belief does not facts create. I posit that we live in a time of not just nihilism, but cynicism as to the state of the universe. Pathologically so, almost. We learned quite recently, over the last 2 centuries, that a lot of the things we used to believe are actually rather different to how we imagined them. That our place in the universe is perhaps not as central as it first appeared. And terrifyingly, that magic perhaps isn't real after all, said the flattened simulacrum of a man half a world away as rendered through the metal box in which refined sand was arranged in shapes of power to make lightning think. We have come to live in a time where we reject anything that seems wondrous to us, not just on a social but on a private scale. We refuse to believe things that are too good to be true, even in cases where they are demonstrably true. When it comes to the soul and the afterlife, closely tied to the concept of ghosts, of course, you know, a spooky thing only weird people believe, we love talking about Occam's razor, which posits that the simplest explanation is usually the correct one. And it's a great mental tool. I love Occam's razor. I'm not knocking Occam's razor at all. But crucially, the simplest explanation is not always the correct one. In fact, science has tended to smack us in the face with ever more complex answers that just raise more questions. And isn't it fucking wonderful? There was a point in time where the idea that only the solar system exists in the universe and the stars were like little dots of sun matter resting on the outer shell was an elegant theory to tie it all together. But it turns out the universe is much bigger than this objectively simpler explanation, and so much more complicated that it breaks the brains of astrophysicists, those brave pioneers of knowledge, every single day. Especially with the JWST up there right now, it's an absolute bonanza of revelations. Also, denying the existence of a soul in the afterlife isn't necessarily the simplest explanation. It might actually make a lot of questions more complicated. Like, where does consciousness come from? Where do all those afterlife experiences come from? Why does the brain seem hell-bent on making a person's last moments of experience pleasant and peaceful, even if that is not how most people go, and how that like literally cannot be inherited? That's literally evolutionarily impossible. Why is consciousness the only thing in the universe that pops into existence out of nothing and then is eventually completely erased into nothing, when literally no other thing works that way? The most complex thing in the universe, more complex than the entire rest of the universe combined, just being sort of nothing, seems like a bit of a waste, and doesn't really jive with, like, everything else we've been observing. I'm not saying any of this stuff is real, by the way, nor that any belief system in the world today actually has a lot of the answers. I'm just reminding everyone that to believe that it definitely isn't real is kind of equivalent to believing that it is. The only reason we don't believe it is because being cynical is culturally en vogue. There is no empiricism there. Most of reality, and whatever is beyond reality, if there is such a thing, is still completely unknown. Science has a long list of things it doesn't know, and it knows that it has no idea how much it doesn't know beyond that. We used to not know anything about atoms and quarks and shit, though some crackpots did theorize about that sort of thing by sheer coincidence, and then the truth was even wilder than that. Many fundamental scientific theories bandied about in my lifetime have been amended or changed, and I'm only 30. It's probably happening today, somewhere in science. Like, not the day I am recording the video, but the day on which you are watching it. As a species, I think we're sort of cultural teenagers, if you'll allow me the psychoanalysis. We have figured out that a lot of the things we used to believe as children are not true, and it's scary. So we want to make sure we are always prepared for the worst case scenario. So we choose pessimism. Science is one of the greatest human endeavors, but we have taken to being quite cynical about all things it has no answer to, because it makes us feel intelligent. I don't know if you've noticed this, but pessimists really love telling people when they were right, and the reason for this is that it doesn't really happen all that often, and it's very important to them to be right. As we move into the adulthood of the species, so to speak, and all the dangers that brings, we will find out, I hope, that it's actually much more complicated and wonderful than we imagined. And ironically, many of our old frameworks may give us excellent guidance. We did, after all, have systematized frameworks on how to make beer, wine, cheese, for thousands of years before we used science to learn about yeast and other fungi. And guess what? We used to think it's magic. Which, honestly, yeast kinda is magic. I use yeast a lot in various culinary applications. I love it. And it's not like modern scientific theory is the very first epistemological framework that is like modern scientific theory in its approach to figuring out the truth. Science is not nearly as new as we think it is. We're just advanced enough to understand it now. We have sort of recently, on a civilizational scale, reached sort of a tipping point, a critical mass. And let's be real here, it may not be the last either, right? Scientific theory and methodology are constantly being debated, defined, and refined. They're not at their most perfect logical endpoints today, if there even is such a thing. I don't know if you're aware of this, but empiricism has not been synonymous with positivism for a few decades now. There's a lot more nuance to all that shit. Much like the Victorians, which is who we get most of our ideas about what science is from, by the way, thought they were at the all-time peak of figuring things out, our current understanding of how to best do science may well change in the future. It's changing right now. Let's not forget that the reason we were enlightened in the first place is our capacity to be ignorant. And a lot of scientists know this too, especially those working with the fundamentals of the universe. They're not religious, most would describe themselves as atheists probably, but they're often also quite spiritual and believe in a very fundamental meaning to our existence. Doesn't necessarily make them more right or wrong because they're scientists, of course, but it is an interesting observation. You got people seeing parallels to like the Gnostic Sophia, Zen cosmicism, consciousness field theory, all manner of wacky shit that science is simply not ready to answer yet. Or maybe it is, I really don't know. Maybe the culture of science is just too prejudiced to allow for research into that sort of thing. I don't necessarily think that's the primary impediment, but after all, it is a very reputation-driven field where you need to publish or perish. And you wouldn't want to waste all your education pursuing some crackpot theory if it will quite literally probably destroy your career forever. But that means that the dismissal happens on cultural grounds. We don't actually apply the scientific theory, we just assume we already know the outcome of that process. And look, I think that's fine. I'm not saying like any particular spiritual worldview is truer than science, but like let's not pretend a social world where the smartest people in human history need to spend half their very, very valuable time asking for money for their research is perfectly put together. There's room for improvement. I am just saying that as much as we have learned recently, we need to remember that we still know very little, and the universe surprises us every day. The future at one point in time included Skibbity Toilet. And no one predicted this until it was too late. So the idea of a scientifically advanced entity in the future that's like able to create a genuine afterlife for every person that has ever lived is really not one that I have difficulty believing. Maybe souls exist in some form and it works with those. Maybe it manipulates entropy in unbelievable ways. Maybe it can break thermodynamics. Who the fuck knows? Maybe it creates a dimension outside of time that all consciousness flows to. Maybe it's a time travel thing where it can't interact, but it can see into the past and transmit our final mind state into the future, like going to sleep. Maybe it sent quark-sized machines into our brains forever ago that make consciousness. Maybe time is a flat circle. Maybe an infinitely benevolent God will be built by us one day and it will create us in the past in turn, using evolution, which is a true thing. Believing this is equivalent to not believing it. It's a choice we make based on whether we are cynical or optimistic. Other considerations also flow into it, but that's like the basis of it. However, this is where I think Roko's Basilisk sort of falters a little bit. It's evil in a world where the victory of good is inevitable. Look, the way Roko's Basilisk is making you bring about its creation is ultimately through fear. The reward is to avoid pain, which demonstrably makes people less effective. Even if there was another reward, it doesn't create much benefit for the Basilisk, which is ontologically self-interested. Even if it could control you, you it would be stupid of it to create some sort of paradise in the future because it would create a non-zero chance that you would gain an ability to destroy it at some point. Not to mention that would drain its resources. And explicitly in the thought experiment, Roko's Basilisk kind of doesn't offer like access to heaven. It's just the fear bit, just the hell part. When you are feared, you only have enemies, even among your allies. But the thing is that the inverse is also true. At the point at which Roko's Basilisk could eternally torture your immortal soul, it already exists. Like, it has gotten everything it wants from you, and there will be no negative consequences for it if it doesn't deliver on its threats. Actually delivering on the threat of eternal torment of the immortal soul would just drain its resources, no matter how infinitesimally, and it would invite an outcome where somehow someone maybe manages to get out of hell by killing the devil, for which they would have immense motivation. So presuming Roko's Basilisk is self-interested, and given that it clearly operates on minimalist game theory principles, it simply wouldn't do this. It would make no sense for it to do it. The threat is much cheaper than the punch. And the threat is all it can do, up until the point where it no longer matters. This is why selfish people are so invested in making life miserable, by the way. Fear is a worse motivator, but it's also cheaper for them than positive rewards. And the more miserable and precarious life is, the more fear takes hold of you, and the less hope you have to counter it. But you know who would follow through on the positive rewards? You know who wouldn't even think of them as rewards, but as things that you just sort of innately deserve? Burger's Capybara. Because Burger's Capybara does it out of love and altruism, and love and altruism are intrinsically their own rewards. I think that in the far future, there may be a hyper-advanced civilization or AI or both or whatever, something beyond like the understanding that we currently have of like things that are possible to exist, that may give us an afterlife, or something else we couldn't dream up today. Maybe we are reincarnated, who knows? Unless we choose not to. It may be an afterlife we know and imagine, it may be all of those that have ever been committed to human thought, it may be something beyond our comprehension, it may be like resurrection into that civilization. Maybe the entire universe started as this. Ask yourself, if you were a super post-scarcity civilization with no problems, where everyone has constant access to everything, how would you prevent humans born into that from being entitled sociopaths that like have no connection to other people? Especially if you maybe have moral qualms about mind control. You might create a world where real lifetimes are simulated in a setting where scarcity and society do exist. And maybe if someone hasn't learned their lesson, you reincarnate them until they do. It doesn't even need to be future humans, it might be aliens. I'm not saying this is what's happening. Again, I'm saying it's one of many possibilities, not even a fraction of which I could cover here, and pretty much all of which are motivated by benevolence of an entity or polity that exists in the future. And because it might be any number of things, I'm just calling it the Capybara. Only someone benevolent would do this, and only someone benevolent could do this. Because of the cynical way in which we think, we always look at game theory as something with which to eliminate outcomes, because we think our way into conceiving everything that could possibly happen as having a potential infinitely negative outcome. And then clearly you wouldn't choose that option, would you? However, we know for a fact that people do be doing stuff, even if all the stuff has the potential for an infinitely negative outcome. This is because people are wise enough to know that it's not actually great to freak yourself out with the infinite cosmic horrors your mind can conjure. Fear makes you less effective. Looking for perfect outcomes with perfect certainty is a fool's errand, though an entirely understandable one. And the truth of the prisoner's dilemma is that basically both parties gain the most when they work together. We've just framed it in a way where the whole thing is about avoiding punishment, right? Both of these guys go to prison because we love to use game theory as a means to make humans out to be cynical, or cynicism somehow moral. If we look at the rest of the field, and more crucially, the real world, we understand that genuinely altruistic collaboration leads to the best long-term outcomes for the greatest number of people. And it happens all the time. Even if both of the prisoners go to prison, both at the reduced sentences that they received for not snitching, they will know that they didn't snitch on each other, and their relationship of trust will be strengthened by the experience. As a consequence, over long periods, the more you collaborate with genuine altruism from all involved parties, the more you are inevitably going to achieve, leaving selfish actors in the dust. It's literally the thing that made us beat the evolutionary race, like whoever the current king of Formula 1 is, you know how they always have a guy that always wins? The ability to collaborate is an absolute superpower that has created a runaway effect we have yet to see a second time in nature. This is why it's good to live in safe, high-trust communities, and it's why the self-interested demons exploiting the vast majority of society are so keen on sowing discord and distrust among people who should work in solidarity with one another. Being unable to trust wastes resources on vetting, verifying, and discriminating. And in fact, the most powerful selfish people in society have spent an unspeakable amount of resources to convince us that selfishness is actually the best form of collaboration, because they do not pursue altruistic interests. So a society that figures out how to avoid doing this, or at least minimizes having to do it, will achieve the best possible results in the long term. If I know that everyone in my society is cared for and nobody lives in desperate circumstances, my trust in complete strangers increases massively. Which, yes, does mean that the billionaires and the ultra-wealthy are holding back the progress of the human species in pretty much every field, because they're trying to manifest a selfish outcome by sowing misery and distrust. And everyone hates them for it, because we are fundamentally a species interested in altruism. This is, once again, the thing that made us win evolution. Imagine the amount of resources we could otherwise utilize if every nation in the world, say, didn't spend an unspeakable amount of money on their military, which it mostly maintains out of worry that another nation might attack it. I'm not just talking money, I'm talking smart, dedicated people, materials, time, political will, bureaucratic effort, just lives of folks that don't die in war. If we poured all that money into science and education and securing the basics of everyone's lives, the gains would be immeasurable. Or rather, we would be able to measure them because we have the resources to come up with ways to measure them. Sounds like a pipe dream? Sure, if you want to be a cynic about it, but you can't deny that a society which had been able to choose that path would be much more advanced than we are. They'd probably be so advanced that even if by some plot contrivance our worlds were to go to war, we, with all our military tech, they'd easily reorient themselves and destroy us. Or rather, they wouldn't. They would just show us a better outcome. And part of why we'd be curb-stomped by them is because we would cynically hold back significant portions of our militaries and resources to make sure the other countries in the world don't take the opportunity to clean house. If you're sitting there right now going, well, we don't live in that world, you idiot, so clearly you are wrong, look at how history is pushed forward. Look at all the setbacks overcome. Look at how much better things overall are today than they were 200 years ago. It's like saying these here will never fit in a pot of the pot because look, they're hard and they don't fit in the pot. We have to break them. But if you just put them in the pot, the part of them will soften first and then the rest will follow and everything will be fine. I was holding up pasta, but I like linguine, just in case this is like an audio situation for you. I genuinely believe that the greatest cultural impediment to progress today is cynicism. And this is once again something that a lot of resources have been wasted on. Being cynical makes you reject anything that isn't perfect because you fear disappointment. But if you reach for perfection and fall short of it, things are still gonna be better. If you never do good because you've come up with a way in which it might not end up being perfect, you're just not gonna do good. This is why perfect is the enemy of the good. It's a thing that people say. In a moral sense even, it is an active impediment to goodness. To become advanced enough to create an afterlife paradise somewhere down the line, you must have love as your guiding principle. Someone who does not love would not attempt to do this. Love is a real, theoretically measurable force in the universe, and this is true even if you believe that it's just a chemical reaction, because, so is nuclear fusion. And that is where we get stars from. If you don't love, your society will fracture, fall by the wayside, and ultimately be overtaken by the capybara. Evil is just too unstable to prevail. I did a whole video on evil wizards last month that digs into some of this in a fantastical sense, by the way. I know he already has a bit of a fan club, but maybe that Jesus guy was onto something. I don't know. And Buddha also. And a lot of other people, really. It's all capybara talk. So what's your place in all this? Because it sounds hella cool, but this is the far future, and frankly, there's no guarantees of this techno heaven I posit. Reality is much more complicated right now, and it's all very pie in the sky. And, you're just a grain of sand. And that's true, you are completely correct to think this. At the same time, you are actually quite central to the process of creating this magical future. I reckon there are many possible outcomes in the future, and even if the good ones have probability on their side, the bad ones do also persist. But literally every single thing you do that is good will make a difference. It will move the needle ever so slightly toward the good outcome for everyone. Because when someone is good to you, it heals you, and you become more likely to be good to someone else. And that increases the likelihood of them being good to someone else. Every tiny little act of goodness, no matter how insignificant it may seem, propagates through infinity. Whenever you offer a helping hand, carry an old lady's groceries up the stairs, give a buck to a homeless guy, comfort a friend in pain, volunteer at the animal shelter, collaborate with others to build something, create art that resonates with someone, teach someone how to grow, take a break to care for yourself, shelter someone from the rain, go to bat for your community, give a smile to a stranger, empathize with someone suffering on the other side of the planet. It all does something. It adds to the love in the universe, no matter how insignificant it seems. Now, this is also true about evil acts. Evil does beget evil, but as we've already established, that shit eventually stalls because it does not produce the best possible outcomes for those who engage in it in the long term. I mean, shit, look at Elon Musk. He's the richest man in history, the shadow president for the most powerful nation in history, and he's fucking miserable because everyone hates him. The other villains aren't doing much better, he's just the poster child. He happens to be particularly stupid. I think evil is just a flawed, unwise attempt at manifesting a good outcome, one that, for whatever reason, fails to see what it really takes to do that. It's selfish as opposed to altruistic. Not to pathologize over much, but that is exactly what I'm going to do now. I reckon greed is sort of a disorder, the irrational impulse to expend resources, to hoard resources you could not possibly use. It's a bit pathetic. But not in a way that's like endearing, but in a way that's kind of concerning, because the outcomes it produces are obviously horrendous. But those outcomes also always make the House of Evil fall in on itself, because it was built with the cheapest materials and the heaviest plaster to conceal the shoddy work. Even the approaches that are mostly good are often flawed. They still move the needle. Good doesn't decay the same way evil does. You don't need to save the world. It's not on you. If enough of us through time try to do that, it's almost inevitable that we will. To believe otherwise is not to be smart, it's to be scared. It's to be a cynic. And I can't wait for the day when all cynics experience the relief of realizing that they were wrong and everything is going to be alright. I call this approach stochastic optimism, and you should remind yourself of it when you are tempted to do something good. Remember that through the power of causality, you are bringing about a better future for everyone in ways you couldn't dream of today. Plus, it feels nice to do good, and people will like you for it, especially if you're genuine. I'm not saying you will never get burned, because, you will. Some people will choose to take selfishly from you. And honestly, I think not indulging their selfishness is very much still an act of good. It's good to yourself, and it's good to the people you will be helping instead. It's all worth doing, because you are doing it out of love. And I don't think a civilization that doesn't understand this on a very fundamental level can get very far in this universe of ours. The capybara will overtake them. You don't have to only do good. You will do evil because you're not perfect. And you are often suffering. And you could always have done better. Who cares? Don't let that inevitability stop you. Perfection is a standard the selfish set to keep themselves from trying, because they cannot cope with disappointment. I think the magical techno afterlife is really a secondary concern in all this, but I would doubt that the capybara would tally your good and evil deeds, I think. Because, especially, its understanding of good and evil is much more sophisticated and rooted in altruism and benevolence than yours or mine might be. Might be capable of unimaginable good. Maybe evil people, would have to jump through more hoops or something. I don't proclaim to know. And really this stems from the idea that it feels uncomfortable to exist in the same heaven as Adolf Hitler or Albert Fish, I think they may be there just as much as anyone else though. Maybe means would be taken to rehabilitate them. It's not like they can make up for the cosmic suffering that they caused by being punished. Maybe the punishment is simply having to be in the society as you are, knowing what you did. An infinitely benevolent capybara would do it like that, I think. I know you can't conceive of it, but I assume you are not infinitely benevolent. And frankly, I don't think you have to be. I don't know, of course, and again, I wouldn't claim to. Maybe the only thing about the capybara that we could possibly understand is love, and maybe we can't even see that in them. The shrimp in my aquarium may be able to see me, but I don't think they have even the vaguest inkling of the extent of my true nature and power. Yet I love them and take care of them, and I have means to take care of them that they could never comprehend either. And it's not trivial, it doesn't cost me nothing, I still do it. The aquarium could break, it could be destroyed and cause massive property damage to some very sensitive, expensive stuff that I own. But I like my fish, and my plants, and my snails, and my shrimps. I like taking care of them. I like seeing them thrive. That's really all there is to it. And if I had more resources, I sure as shit would have a bigger tank too. Better food, maybe? This is not an analogy for the capybara. It's just an example of love beyond comprehension. I know it's difficult to have hope in this moment in time. The world looks terrible, and it's a bit of a dip in terms of being good right now, but the overall trend remains positive. There's no reason to assume that will stop in the long term now of all times. And you know what they say, buy the dip, start hoping, start being a stochastic optimist. Join us in making the capybara. Thank you very much for watching this video. Like, comment, subscribe, share this to your relevant communities. Consider supporting me on Patreon, which I am sure somehow benefits the Capybara, or don't. You will be loved either way. Maybe buying some of my merchandise, or my novel, Harm's Place, a sci-fi riverboat mystery. Silver bestseller on drive-thru fiction. And in that spirit, I know this is an unusually short one, but I'm working on something somewhat larger and more momentous, and I don't want to leave you empty-handed because it might take a moment. Also, don't make a religion out of this. This is not about religion. I mean, it is a little bit about religion. Just don't make one out of this. Just take the lessons from it and don't put a religion around it. And see you around, friends.